monk once sat staring at all the food she had left. Convinced it would be immoral to eat an entire pile of rice when so many had so little, she decided to eat only as much rice as would not make a pile. As hard as she tried, she could never find that single grain of rice that turned a few pieces into a pile. Back and forth, she searched, but it never appeared. That single grain of rice simply never existed. She looked for definition and delineation despite the obvious indication that it does not exist, because the world does not need it. I found myself in that state when I began wondering what a song even was. If a song is an accumulation of intentions, then at what point does a single intention turn it into a song? I'm asking because I'm searching. Am I searching for definition and delineation where it simply does not exist? How can something so valuable to human existence be so difficult to determine? Where is the border between song and not song? So welcome to Composing Pieces with Tenacious Bird of Prey. I'm your host, and I don't know what a song is. This was my very first guitar. It's actually as old as I am. It's a 1976 Yamaha classical guitar. My mom bought it for my dad the year I was born. I wrote my first song on it in the 8th grade. It's about how much I hated my teacher. My favorite bands at the time were Violent Femmes, Suicidal Tendencies, and Guns N' Roses. The song wasn't very good, but it changed something in the sense that as soon as I was done writing it or playing it, I wrote it in the spur of a moment. Lots of yelling and cussing, very kind of Black Flag sounding song with one chord. But what it did is, as soon as I was done, I felt like I had crossed a threshold or a doorway. And looking back, I think what it was I had taken a set of emotions or intentions and feelings and turned them into a song. And I think that's something that goes back so deep in the human experience, and there was a connection there. And ever since that day, I've always been fascinated with songwriting and the whole process, and not how it makes you famous or rich, because clearly it's not, but how it connects you to every single human that ever existed, because we've all gone through that. And I did it on this guitar with one chord and a bunch of cuss words. And by all measures, this is a pretty shitty guitar, but I love it. And it's brought forth lots of songs. And I don't know what I'd do without it. to play. The oldest known instrument ever discovered was a flute that was carved out of the bones of a bear. Now, it's been said that we've actually lost the original word that meant bear because humans were so scared of saying it that they thought that act alone would summon the creature. So I think it's interesting that our first instrument was made out of such an animal. I like to imagine a scenario, much like the Flintstones. Fred Flintstone comes home from work to find a bear has eaten his entire family. Parts of them are thrown across the room. The bear looks at him and says, "Fred, I just ate your fucking family, and I'm gonna go shit them in the woods." Fred Flintstone looks back and says, not only am I gonna kill you, I'm going to take your bones and I'm going to make an instrument out of it. And I'm going to sing the song of my people. And I believe that's scientifically how it did go down. So kids, stay in school. A bear done ate my family. Shit, I'm out in the woods. A bear done ate my family. Shit, I'm out right there in the woods. Now I ain't got no woman in my cave. So when we talk about the value of a song, what are we talking about? If you go to any thrift store in the Boston area, you'll find bins of these old records. They're maybe 50 cents each. And my grandfather grew up in Dorchester. When he was around 11 or 12, his mother died. Then he was hit by a truck that left him blind in one eye. And his father was an abusive, cruel alcoholic that used to lock him and his brothers in the closet. They eventually took him away from his father. And he had every license in the world to become mean, bitter, and angry. But he met my grandmother, and that seemed to change everything. His first job was working construction, and that's what he did for his whole life. He started out hauling cement in wheelbarrows, and I used to work for my grandfather. Every summer when I'd come home from school, I'd work for him. And for me, school was always a miserable experience. And he was the one who taught me that success in college or school didn't parallel success in the world. You could fail at school and still be fine. But it was literally shit work. One of my jobs was to clean the shit out of a toilet because we were renovating the building. And the building had been closed for 25 years. But somehow, somebody snuck in just before they sealed up the building and took a shit. And it was my job to clean it. And at the time, that shit was literally older than I was. And he loved every single minute of it. And he loved mentioning and reminding me that my $8 an hour was far too much for my skill set, and how generous he was for agreeing to pay me even that. And then one day we were sitting at my grandparents' kitchen table, and my grandmother couldn't figure out where her cup of tea was. But the problem was, there was a cup of tea by the kettle, there was a cup of tea on the table, and there was a cup of tea in the microwave. And she'd also take things off the shelf or out of the cabinet and put them on the table, and then wonder minutes later, excuse me, who had done that. And from there it just got worse. And over the next couple of years, she just kind of faded into her Alzheimer's. And it was particularly tough when she understood that she couldn't remember us. She would ask me who I was, and I would tell her I was her grandson. And she would apologize profusely and say it must be so painful for me, but there's nothing you could do. You could just say, you could just comfort her. You could just tell her, don't worry about it. You knew she loved you. And I could see in my grandfather's eyes how much he missed her and how much he wanted those memories to return. And every day when I worked for my grandfather, we would eat lunch together. And after lunch, she would go down for a nap. And if you've ever taken care of somebody who has Alzheimer's, there's a danger in putting them down for a nap because you don't know if they're going to get up and walk around and hurt themselves. And in this case, my grandfather was worried she would wake up or get up and fall down the stairs. So we would take her to her room and lay her down. And you couldn't stay in the room and watch her because that would distract her, and she had a sense that she was being watched. So we would have to wait outside her bedroom with the door closed, and there'd be a tiny little crack. And he would put on a record and play it while she was laying down. And she would start to tap her fingers on her shoulder, and that would let him know she was going to take a nap. And we were sitting there outside the door, looking through the crack, and he put the record on, and she started to tap her shoulder, and he looked at me and he smiled, and he didn't smile a lot, but he looked at me and he said, "She remembers." And it was this record he was playing. She could remember this record. And for me, there's no greater value than that. And I think this is the most valuable record I own. And I think people would just flip right past it in a bin. And to me, when we talk about songs and the value of a song, I can't imagine anything more valuable than that. John and Catherine Doherty, welcome to the pearly gates of heaven. Oh, yeah. John, you had that grandson of yours. He was befibled, very befibled. And yet you paid him $8 an hour. Yep. For your generosity towards such a soft-brained soul, you have earned a spot in heaven. A house next to the Kennedys. Nice. And for that grandson of yours, don't worry, he'll be cleaning the devil's own turds shortly enough. Careful, you may just write a song about it. Tell me about it. It's hours and hours about music. It's hard to be polite sometimes. And you, Catherine, I hear you have an album dropping Tuesday. Can we hear a bit if you don't mind? Where the fuck is my cup of tea? It's on the counter. Where the fuck and there's a tea by the kettle too. I told you 1,000 times. Who the fuck are you? Yes, who the fuck are you? Cause this is Jesus. I don't recall. I don't like this, Catherine. Ever knowing who the fuck you are. Perhaps a touch of the purgatory might do you, Catherine. All right, enough of this, Catherine. You know who I am.